Hey everyone, welcome back to another video, and today I wanted to talk about the books that I read in the first 10 days of June. So I have already read 10 books, which I still don't understand how that was possible. I will say though, I'm in a season right now in life where I'm just not really doing much. I'm not working just yet, and I am on summer break, and it's just been such a blessing to be able to obviously do household tasks and everything, but while I'm doing those tasks I can listen to audiobooks, and I've just been consuming books like I've never consumed them before, and it's just been such an awesome last few weeks, and I'm so grateful for this time. This will not be the case in the fall. I will definitely be a lot busier once I start school again, but for now I'm just taking advantage of the fact that I am on break and I can read so much now. So it really is such a blessing, and I'm really grateful. The only downside is I'm kind of entering a reading slump, and it's probably because I've been reading so many books, but overall I've been having a great time with all the books I've been reading. And yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and go over the books I read in the first 10 days of June. So the first few books are all books that I actually started in the last couple days of May, and then I ended up finishing them right at the beginning of June. And so I'll go over those first. So we first have Beauty of Darkness, and this is book 3 in the Remnant Chronicles series by Mary Pearson. And this is YA fantasy. It's pretty well known. It's been around for a while. I've read the first 2 books in May and overall really enjoyed them. I will say though, the first book is still my favorite in the entire trilogy. So the first book, we have a girl named Leah, and she is a princess, and she's basically meant to marry a prince from another kingdom, and so she is getting ready for her wedding, but she ends up fleeing. She runs away. She doesn't want to marry this prince, and she ends up in this other city, and she's at a tavern, and she spends a lot of time in this tavern, and then 2 men walk in. One of them is an assassin that was sent to kill her, and the other is the prince that she was supposed to marry, and he is also looking for her. And so she doesn't know who these 2 men are, and throughout the first book, the reader doesn't know who is who. So we're given 2 names, but we don't know which one is the assassin and which one is the prince. And it's just such a fun concept, and I had such a good time reading that book. And honestly, trying to figure out who was my favorite part of the whole book. And I also really love books set in taverns, and that was also really fun to follow. But the second book is a lot more political, and then the third book is things just coming together, and we get a little bit more of this kingdom and its history, and how the magic system and the history kind of come together. And it's a really interesting trilogy. Like I said, the first book is my favorite, and this third book I gave 3.5 stars. I thought it was very entertaining. I would just say that it's a bit too long for my liking. There were certain parts that really just, I just wanted them to hurry up and, move on, and it was just a bit too long, and the ending was really rushed. And I personally think that the person the princess ends up with, she should have ended up with the other man. So it's a personal preference. I'm not going to spoil anything, but it just wasn't my favorite ending to a trilogy, and I definitely am glad I read the trilogy though. I thought they were a lot of fun, and yeah, that's one YA fantasy I actually really enjoyed. So that's the first book I read in June. Next up, we have Dreams Lie Beneath by Rebecca Ross, and Rebecca Ross is one of my favorite authors. I absolutely love her books, and oh my goodness, I love this so much. I gave it 4.5 stars. It was so good. So this one is about a girl named Clementine, and her father are both magicians, basically. So her father is what is called a warden, and so in every town and city in this world, you have wardens, and they are tasked with fighting nightmares. So every new moon, which is about once a month, nightmares come to life in each city. And so during the night, the wardens go out to fight these nightmares. And the way that they learn about the nightmares and what to expect is that they record the citizens' nightmares down in a book. So there's this book of nightmares. And basically, Clementine is learning how to do this, and she is also fighting nightmares during the new moon. And one day, 2 brothers show up in their city, and one of them challenges Clem's dad to this competition almost to see who can beat this nightmare, and then whoever wins ends up taking over the wardenship. So either Clem's father would continue being warden or this man would take over. Unfortunately, this man beats Clementine's father, and so Clementine and her father have to leave, and this man ends up taking over as warden of the city. And then we have his brother who is warden of another city, and Clementine goes undercover. So she uses a magic spell to change her physical appearance. She ends up in the brother's city and joins him as a partner, but her intentions are to exact revenge on him because of his brother and what his brother did to her dad. And so as she is partnered up with this man named Phelan, they are learning more and more about this mountain where these nightmares are coming from, and the history and this death that occurred, and how this is continuing this curse of new moon nightmares. And so they're trying to figure out how to stop these from happening. So the world that they're in basically has this curse which is causing these nightmares. And this book was so interesting. The world was just so beautifully drawn out. Like, I just absolutely loved the setting. It was just very like deep forest, very whimsical, very darker fairy tale, but not scary. Like, it was just, oh, it was just so beautiful. I loved it. There's definitely an enemies to lovers trope. That's definitely a plus for me. And there is this villain in the book, and it is a very, very creepy knight. He enters people's nightmares, and Clem and her father can't figure out who he is, how he's entering these nightmares, where he's coming from, and it's just so unsettling. And oh, this book is just so good. I absolutely love it. It has a very like spooky atmosphere, but it's not scary like at all. But yeah, it's just beautifully written, and I absolutely loved it. The next book I read is With This Pledge by Tamara Alexander, and I haven't read a Tamara Alexander book in so long. It was about time. This book was very, very hard-hitting and emotional, and I probably would have given it a 5 stars, but I was just not in the right like mind space to read this book. There are very gruesome depictions of battle wounds, and just a lot of talk of death, and it's very, very morbid. This entire book is basically set in a house called Carnton, and it is in Tennessee, and it takes place over the course of time that this house is used as like a hospital for Confederate soldiers during the Civil War. So our main character, Lizzie, is basically helping out with all these surgeries and amputations that are occurring in this house. She lives there as a governess for the 2 young children of the owners. And so while Lizzie is helping the surgeon, there is a young soldier that is dying in her arms, and he asks her to deliver his final words to his mother. And all she has is his name. There's no other way that she knows how to contact his family, and so she's trying to figure out what to do about this young man and his request. And then she meets a Confederate soldier named Captain Roland Ward Jones, and this book is actually based on the real-life love letters between Elizabeth Clouston and Captain Jones. So Captain Jones is also injured in this house, and he is adamant that he will not have his legs amputated, even though the doctor believes he should. And so he basically asks Lizzie to vow that she will fight for, you know, I guess like patient rights. Like, he has the right to choose as a patient to not have his legs amputated against the doctor's wishes. And so Lizzie's getting to know him, and it's a very, very beautiful story, although it is really, really depressing. There's just so much suffering, and yeah, it was a lot. I think this author handles the Civil War era and slavery very, very well. And I absolutely loved the main character. She is a staunch abolitionist, and so she's hiding this from her bosses. Basically, they don't know that she has these views on slavery. And then when she meets Captain Jones, and he is a slave owner, and they start discussing slavery and the morality of it. And it's just such a beautiful way that this author has really emphasized that, you know, we're all human, and it is never okay to own another human being. And it's such a beautiful story. I loved how strong Elizabeth's views were depicted. And the thing is, she had a lot of compassion for people who may have had differing views, and she was very kind in her discussions, but at the end of the day, she stood her ground. And there's a part where she actually wants to help the household slaves learn to read, which was illegal at the time. And it's just such a beautiful moment in the book, and I would highly, highly recommend if you enjoy Civil War era books, although it is quite gruesome and very depressing, but at the same time has a beautiful hope message, and I did really enjoy it. So would highly recommend this one. All right, so next I read The Paris Library, and this one I actually just talked about in an unhaul video because I will be getting rid of it. I ended up giving it 2 stars. It was just not what I was hoping it would be. I wouldn't say it's a terrible book, but it just was not doing it for me. So it is dual timeline. It takes place partly in Paris in the 1930s and 40s, so during World War II, and then in the 1980s in Montana. And so we have a main character named Odile in the 30s who starts working as a librarian in an English library in Paris. And then in the 1980s, we have a high school student named Lily who's living in Montana. She meets Odile, who is now living in Montana in the 80s. They strike up an unlikely friendship, and basically Lily is doing a school project on France. So she asks Odile a lot of questions about the war, about her time in France, and we just get to learn a little bit more about Odile, both from her perspective and then also from Lily, who is learning about her. And honestly, I just wasn't really interested in the book. I wasn't interested in the characters. There are some choices that Odile makes in the book that I feel like as a reader, we are meant to feel sympathetic towards, but I just couldn't understand why she would do what she did. So it just wasn't my favorite book. I wasn't the biggest fan of the characters, and I just found the plot to be a little bit boring, but for any of you historical fiction fans out there, you may still enjoy it. So I would definitely still check it out if it sounds interesting to you. Then I read The Lioness, and this is a historical fiction that takes place in the 60s in Africa. We have a woman named Kate, and Kate basically invites all these actors and the different people that she works with in Hollywood. So she's an actress, she works in Hollywood, and she invites all these people on her, like the second leg of her honeymoon. So she went on a honeymoon with her new husband in Europe, and then they go on a trip to Africa, to the Serengeti in Tanzania, and they invite all their like Hollywood friends, and they have this get together, a bunch of safari expeditions, and they're just having a great time until their camp gets ambushed and they all get kidnapped. And it is very, very bloody, very gruesome. So this book is definitely not for the faint of heart, because there are wild animals that do some killing, and there are guns, and it is just brutal. It is so, so gruesome. So they get kidnapped and people are just being killed, and it's honestly, like, it was very, very fast paced, which is what kept me going. And so in each chapter, you get like a different character perspective, and then you're flashing back to their time in Hollywood. And those flashbacks really took me out of the main plot line, and I just wasn't really enjoying reading about their time in Hollywood. But anytime we got back to the like present day, or you know, in the 1960s when they were kidnapped, I was just so interested to know what would happen next. But there's one part in the book that isn't even to the halfway point yet, and a character just makes this remark, and automatically it just gives away basically what is happening. There wasn't a lot of foreshadowing. It was just kind of like a character said something that was obviously what was happening, and then at the end it's like, oh yeah, that was what was happening. There just weren't clues. It was just very much like, this is what's happening. I'm not gonna give the reader any clues as to why it happened, if I'm making any sense. Like, it was just random. It was a very random ending, but I really loved the setting. The Serengeti, the African like savannah, is just absolutely beautifully described. But yeah, it was very gruesome. There was quite a bit of language, which I wasn't the biggest fan of, but overall it was a pretty decent thriller, and I ended up giving it 3 stars, so not terrible. But definitely not for the faint of heart. Then I read Kilmany of the Orchard by Ella Montgomery, and this book had the writing that I was expecting, the nature descriptions that I was expecting, and that is the reason it is getting a 3 stars from me, because the romance was just no. So this book is about a girl named Kilmany who is mute. Her family doesn't let her go out, and it's because of the history of her parents, and she doesn't really, you know, socialize, even like using sign language or anything. She uses a slate to write. And then we get a new teacher that moves to her town in Prince Edward Island, and his name is Eric, and he just did not like him. He had some weird ideas about women, and he was quite racist towards an Italian boy, which really, really put me off. And I just did not like him as a love interest. He just had very weird ways of expressing himself, and obviously this book is a product of its time. I'm not gonna, you know, bash it for that, but it's just the romance and some of Eric's ways of thinking that really made me frustrated. And oh man, it's okay. This is one of Ella Montgomery's earlier books, so I know that I still have some really good ones to get to, but 3 stars. I actually enjoyed the reading process to an extent, and the writing is what really got me. So beautiful nature writing, and this takes place in June, which is a plus. I love reading books set in the month that I am reading them in, so that was a lot of fun. Then we have a book. It is a graphic novel that I read, and I don't read graphic novels very often, but I had asked some friends for recommendations, and one of my friends, Katie from Paperbacks and Ponytails, recommended this book, and I picked it up right away because it was available on Libby. So I read the graphic novel physically while also listening to the audiobook, and the audiobook experience was sublime. It was so beautiful. There were just like sound effects and a bunch of different narrators, and it just brought the story to life, and oh, I could not recommend the audiobook enough. And so this is basically a memoir in graphic novel form, and it's about two brothers, and they are named Omar and Hassan, and they are Somalian refugees that had to flee to Kenya to a refugee camp because of the civil wars that were going on in Somalia. Their father was killed, and they were basically separated from their mother and have not been able to locate her, and so they end up in this refugee camp, and they're taken under the guardianship of a woman named Fatuma, and she is just the sweetest lady, and just such a beautiful story. And I loved getting to know Omar and Hassan's story through graphic novel form. It was just so beautifully told. So Omar is basically such a good big brother. He is a kid himself, but he's taking care of younger brother Hassan, who has a form of disability. I may be wrong, but I don't think it's specified what disability he has, but he's only able to say one word. And I think the word is mother in their language. If I'm mistaken, please correct me. And one day Omar is given the opportunity to go to school, but he's really torn because he wants to stay with his brother. He wants to take care of Hassan. He feels so guilty if he leaves Hassan at their camp and goes off to school. But little by little, Omar is convinced that an education is a priceless thing to have, and he just basically shoots for the stars. And I just loved watching his growth and his courage. And then at the end of the book, you also, after everything comes together, you get an afterword read out loud by Omar himself, which was absolutely wonderful. And I did some research about him and his brother afterwards as well, just about like where they ended up in life. And it's just such a beautiful story. I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. The only thing is I wasn't the biggest fan of the art style in the graphic novel, but that didn't take away from the reading experience at all. The audiobook really elevated it for me, so would highly, highly recommend this graphic novel. It is a very quick read, and I think a very important one. I then read a Miss Marple, and that is a Caribbean mystery, and my copy has completely come apart, but that's okay. I'll end up either taping it or getting a new one. Either way, this book was really, really good. I think I gave it 3.5 stars. So in this book, Miss Marple is on vacation. She is in the Caribbean, and she's with this group of people. We get a full cast like usual with an Agatha Christie, and a murder occurs, as usually happens. And I'm not going to say really anything about the plot in this one because there isn't much I could say without it just spoiling what happens in the book. I really, really loved that Miss Marple actually takes center stage. She's actually there for the book, for the majority of the book. Some other Miss Marples I have recently read, she isn't there for much of the story. She only really comes in like at the end or just sporadically throughout the book. But in this one, she's like a main point of view. So I really, really enjoyed that. I loved the conversations she had with some of the characters. There's a really like grumpy, crotchety old man named Mr. Raphael, and he is the funniest character. I absolutely loved every time he sat down with Miss Marple on the beach and they just talked, and the mystery itself was really, really good. I did not guess the ending as usual, and I just had such fun reading this. So I would definitely recommend this Miss Marple, and it is perfect for the summertime. I am so glad I read it this month. I definitely felt like I was on the beach reading it, and it was just really, really fun. So 3.5 stars, a great Miss Marple. Then I read a book that I am so glad to say I have read it. It's just, I have wanted to read this book for so long, and I just needed the incentive to do it. And Mary Among Stories, she started with her friends, the Hobbits' book club, and their book club read for June, July, and August is The Fellowship of the Ring, and so that gave me the incentive to finally pick it up. And I also buddy read this with Amanda from Book Lover Amanda, and we had such a good time buddy reading it and just talking about the book. So it's not a 5-star read for me, and that's not to say that I didn't adore this book. I gave it 4 stars, but it's just not quite a 5-star read for me. Most of that has to do with the fact that there are a few chapters that are just so exposition heavy and so wordy, but I know it's for a purpose. I know that it's meant to be because this world is just so vast, and Middle Earth is just such an incredible world and literally my favorite fictional world now. I absolutely love it, and I got a little bit of an introduction to it because I've read The Hobbit twice, but this book just really brought everything about Middle Earth to life. The only thing is I really feel like I would need to reread this book and the series as a whole a few more times to feel like I have a good grasp on everything about the world and like its history and everything. And I love to read like appendices and like an encyclopedia or something, because there's just so much to know, and I feel like I still don't know as much as I should. So much went over my head, and so for that reason it's really a 4-star for me, just because of the reading experience. And I really base my star ratings on how I feel about the book, not necessarily like its merit as a book. It's more like my feelings, if that makes sense. But absolutely loved it. The characters, oh my gosh, I absolutely loved them. Frodo and Sam, Pippin and Merry, like they were just so fun. And I love Aragorn, and I love Gandalf, and I just love them all, and I can't wait to pick up book 2. It's probably going to happen this month because I am just impatient to continue with the story, because you need to know what's going to happen. Like, what's going to happen? What's going to happen to Frodo and Sam? Like, I just want Sauron to be defeated, and for all my Hobbit friends and my elf friends and the dwarves and just all of them to live happily ever after. That's all I want. That's all I need from these books. That's all I need from Tolkien. I just need the evil Dark Lord to be vanquished, and then I will be very happy. And so the 10th book I read this month is called Lost in Darkness, and this is by Michelle Grief, and I buddy read this with Holly from Lovely Day with Holly, and I'm so glad we buddy read it together. We had a really great time, and I love buddy reading. I love talking to people about books as I'm reading them. It's a lot of fun. So it's basically about a girl named Amelia, and she has a brother who has some sort of disorder where he is abnormally large. Like, it's almost like gigantism. If it's not that, I don't know what else it could be, but it's definitely some sort of genetic issue, and he's very large, and as a child he was also injured, so his face is very disfigured. When people see him, they are very scared. Their father passes away, and Amelia ends up moving back to her father's house to live with Colin. And basically there is this revolutionary surgeon who promises very great things for Colin, and Amelia and Colin decide to go forth with the surgery, and it's supposed to, I guess, like fix his disfigurement. And there is another doctor who is partnering up with the surgeon to do this operation, and his name is Graham. And Graham has a lot of suspicions about this surgeon and his work, and there's definitely like Victor Frankenstein vibes with this surgeon, and it's just such a good book. It is like a Regency era gothic romance with a very beautiful sprinkling of Frankenstein, and I loved it. Frankenstein is one of my favorite books, so there were a lot of nods to Frankenstein and Mary Shelley and all of that, and it was just a really fun book. Honestly, did not end as I expected it would, but I really enjoyed my time reading it, and I would highly recommend if you are a fan of like gothic Regency era romances. It was a lot of fun. All right, so those are all the books I read in early June, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you have read any of these books, please let me know in the comments. I had a great first 10 days of June, and I'm overall happy with what I read, so I'm hoping that the rest of June I also read other great books. So that's it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, I appreciate each and every one of you guys for taking time out of your day to watch me ramble. I really do appreciate it, and I'm very grateful, so thank you. And I hope to see you all next time. Bye!